Well, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm joined by Eric Stearns, and today we're digging into my message from Sunday, which was all about the denials, this famous moment in the life of Simon Peter that feels so familiar because we can feel that we're in the same position. Either in big and small ways, there are ways we deny Jesus, and we're going to talk about what that means for us, how that's looked like in what that's looked like in our lives, and how Jesus helps us to move forward. So let's get into it. I don't know, this feels arrogant to say, but I don't have a really good denying Jesus story. You know what I'm saying? It'd be awesome if I had this is one time in my life where I definitively deny the importance of Jesus in my life, but I don't really have
I'm glad you don't have that.
Yeah, I don't really have that.
That's okay to not have.
Yeah. There are micro ways though. There's not one big oof, this is a time that I denied Jesus, but there are definitely times in my life that I can think about where I have misrepresented how important Jesus is to me, or misrepresented how much my faith means to me in order to not feel so ostracized by other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at Northern State, I got involved in a church, I got involved in campus ministry. That was all part of my life, but also as a part of this music department where there weren't a lot of Christian people. Let's just be honest about where we were. And so when I would go Sunday, on a Saturday night, they'd be like, oh, hey, come hang out here and let's do this. And it's no, I've got to get up really early the next morning. And the first service is at 8:30. I have to be ready to sing at 8:30 tomorrow morning. We're all vocalists. We all know that that rest is important and proper hydration, and Budweiser is not proper hydration for singing. But there were definitely times where it was hard to just consistently say no to that, and not feel like I'm not like that I'm missing out on some really important experience, but that I'm missing out on having friendships with people that still are important to me, and so there were times I still feel like I made the right choice more often than not, but there were definitely times where it's just it's just what I do on Sunday mornings. It's not that big of a deal. Not willing to admit that, no, this is God's up to something in the middle of all of this, and so when I transferred schools and officially declared that I wasn't going back, there were people that were just what? You're gonna do what now? What? And it really caught people off guard. And again, in another work situation when I was working at the hospital, I just I was going to seminary and my faith was important and my faith was growing and developing in a lot of ways, but then Christ well. I just know that I wasn't a good representative of Christ in that situation. Because there were other people that were, there was one person that was just vehemently against anyone having faith in Jesus, despite working for a Catholic hospital, but it's fine. And so I don't know if I feel like I shrunk down to her level rather than being the person that God made me to be, and so maybe that's how I did. That's definitely how I denied Jesus, but maybe that's the big moment of how I denied the importance of exactly what my faith means to me.
So when people were surprised, back to the college story, when people were surprised that you were making that change, how did that make you feel as a follower of Jesus?
Right. It made me feel a little bit terrible that they didn't just know that about me. And it's because I was guarded with that because I understood that my worldview differed from theirs.
Sure.
And it just felt like there were more of them, or maybe they were just louder. But I definitely know that one of the people that invited me out a lot understood that I was a Christian.
Right.
She's like, well, are you a goody-goody? And I was like, yeah. Right now, yeah, I am, and that's okay. So... Yeah, it was very weird, and like even coming back, like I served in Burke, which is right next to my hometown. Like I had a moment with a friend of mine from middle school. They're just like, I cannot see you as a pastor. Like this just doesn't meld with who I knew you to be at that time. And it's just like, yeah, thanks be to God that there's been growth. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm okay with that, because we were not super BFFs in middle school. But it was also just like, I'm hoping that by what I'm doing now, that becomes more okay for you.
Right.
And it never did, but that's more on that person than it is on me.
Sure. But understanding that, we should never dwell on the mistakes of the past.
Right.
But that can allow you to, understanding that can allow you to become a better person. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's even more kind of micro denials, if you want to call them that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And just in our daily lives.
Oh yes.
Treating people the way we shouldn't, or whatever that might be.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Not doing, we spent a few weeks before the sermon series on the basics of our faith, and like faith practices around prayer and scripture and confession and service, and like there are ways where we choose not to do that every day. There are ways that we make the choice to not practice the basics of our faith. And not that that's, I'm not trying to raise it to the level of what Simon Peter does to Jesus, but, that is a way when we don't take our faith seriously, that's kind of part of what denying Jesus can look like.
It's kind of like we talked about last week. Like, Jesus doesn't go anywhere.
Yes. Yep.
We just stray away and put our priorities in other things.
Yep. Yeah.
The good thing is, like you said on Sunday, the second time, the third time, the fourth time, he's always willing to forgive us, no matter what.
Yep.
The 100th time.
Yep. Jesus is the Lord of the second chance. It all feels very classic Peter, like we've come to know and love and expect. This just everything, like we talked a lot. Sunday we talked a lot about, the events of that night. There was this one big long chapter in Matthew's gospel, and like one of the things that Adam Hamilton said in his book on Simon Peter is that an entire quarter of the Gospel of Matthew is dedicated to what we call, not even just Holy Week, but like the death and resurrection of Jesus. Like beginning with chapter 26, all through all the events that happened that night, and when you play, gospel hopscotch to get all of the events in line of what happened that night, a lot of stuff happened, and Simon Peter is in the midst of all of it. The start of the night is them in the upper room and Jesus washing feet. Like that would have been the first thing that happened. And one of the commentaries I read this week made this big deal of how every disciple walked past the basin, and they all just kind of like secretly wished, who's going to do it? Who's going to? It's not going to be me, because that's demeaning. But who's going to do it? And then Jesus does it. And the shame they all would have felt by making Jesus do that, because he is the last person that should have been doing that. And Simon Peter is the one that has the gall or the audacity or the fortitude to say, Jesus, you're not going to do this. Like, this is not how this should work. Like, you are in the wrong spot. You are not going to wash my feet. That's Simon Peter. That's absolutely just who he is and who he has proven himself to be time and time and time again. Like, he doesn't always get it right the first time, but here's the second time coming around, and he gets it. He gets the message. He understands, oh, you're trying to do something. And then Jesus is like, unless you let me wash your feet, you have no share with me. And Simon Peter says, okay, well then, if that's true, then not just my feet, but my entire body, I'll give you everything. And again, that's just so classically Simon Peter, as we've come to know and expect from him. He is the one that speaks up. He is the one that overreacts. He is the one that finally gets it, that it dawns on him that Jesus is up to something. And like, not that the other disciples didn't have those moments of revelation, but Simon Peter's the one that usually has the voice for it. because he, again, we saw it in the last couple of weeks. He is the leader, and this is why. It's those moments where he takes more and more of that mantle on himself.
So, because he says wash my hands and my head as well.
Mm-hmm.
Why does he say that?
Because if washing feet is important, there are other parts of him that are dirty in both physical and spiritual senses. Like head and feet were washed because that was just a physical reality of sharing, highways and byways with livestock.
Mm-hmm.
You can try and be careful where you step. It's inevitably going to happen that your feet are going to be disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and so there's the physical sense of that, but then there's also we talk so much about head knowledge and heart knowledge, those two different things, or, the intellect and action, like thought and deed. Don't just wash my gross, disgusting feet, mm-hmm. wash these hands that are going to serve you and this head that's going to think about who you are. Mm-hmm. It's fully encompassing the entirety of our human existence and experiences.
So let's keep talking about that.
Sure.
So why didn't Jesus want to wash his hands and head then?
That's a good question that I don't necessarily know if I have an answer to. I think it's because in that moment, it was about the lowliness of it all. Jesus is taking on the role of the servant. And for me, they've made mention of this before. I am not a feet guy. And their feet were going through everything with, leather and twine. That's all they had to protect their feet from stuff. So their feet would have been gross. And washing the feet is reserved for the lowest of the low. And Jesus is saying that this is how it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So your head and your hands have a little bit more honor to them, and Jesus is trying to lower himself as low as he can lower himself alongside of his disciples.
Almost showing that he's not in that instance, he's not worthy enough to wash hands and head. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I've always wondered.
Definitely.
So, we're washing feet.
Mm-hmm.
Because then Jesus starts. Then it's the meal.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So then that's when Simon starts arguing with Jesus again.
Yeah. So Jesus and Peter kind of get into it again because during the course of the meal and then in the aftermath of the meal, Jesus starts to tell them, hey, one of you is going to deny me. And and Simon Peter responds, well, you can't just say that and then not tell us who. Mm-hmm. Judas is already pieced out. It's not going to be Judas, and Jesus just gives this very cryptic answer about the one that dips his hand in the bowl with me, is the one that's going to deny me, and it ends up being Simon Peter, because that's what happens, mm-hmm. and and that's why Simon Peter gets so indignant. No, this is not going to happen. Even if everyone else falls away, I will never. And Jesus then again lays hard truth on him and says, no, you're going to deny me 3 times before the night's over. And Simon Peter doubles down and says, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And, I think because Jesus calls him in John's gospel, because other gospels don't have that story, but in John's gospel, we know that it's going to be Simon Peter to deny Jesus even before,
before it
happens. And I think that's why there is such that's why Simon Peter gets so indignant in those moments, and that's why he comes off a little bit even more aggressive than the Simon Peter we're used to, by saying, he throws the rest of the disciples under the bus and then just goes right to, I'll die with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's
seems like he just gets more. So, man, is he a passionate person?
Yes,
but it almost seems like he gets more aggressive as the night goes on, right?
Oh yeah,
because then he starts swearing and cussing
mm-hmm.
that he doesn't know who Jesus is.
Right.
And then they get to the garden, he cuts a guy's ear off.
Right. Yeah.
Like
Flip it, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they get to the garden. Judas does what Judas does. They start to take Jesus away. And then, he does take a sword and cuts off the ear of Malchus, which is one of my favorite, Bible trivia things. In only one gospel is where we get the name of the guy. The rest of them just say it's the assistant to the high priest. But I think it's in John's gospel where we get to know that his name is Malchus. And, that's just one of my favorite Bible trivia things.
Very good.
What's the name of the guy that Simon cut his ear off of? And it's Malchus. But
good to know.
Yeah, handy little party trick.
Never know when I might need that.
Exactly, it's true. And then Simon Peter follows at a distance until he just can't anymore. Jesus is taken into captivity. There's no way to continue to follow him. And that's when the questions start happening, and that's when the denials start happening. And yes, as those get on, he gets more and more vehement that he does not know who Jesus is. And he does curse and swear and, carry. Not really carry. We don't really know if he just carries on, but he wants it known beyond a shadow of a doubt that he just does not know who Jesus is. Because his butt's on the line. If he just watched what they did to Jesus, and they took him away, and that's never a good thing. And so to save his own neck, he denies Jesus. And then one of the things that Adam Hamilton makes pretty clear in his book, Simon Peter, is that's the last time we see him until after the crucifixion. He does desert. And we don't see him again until he's locked in the upper room with the other disciples, cowering in fear. Yeah, there was a really powerful paragraph that Adam Hamilton wrote about how Simon Peter is not there. John, the beloved disciple, is there along with his mother and Mary, the mother of Jesus. But Simon Peter's not there. The rock upon whom the church is built is not there for Jesus' last words on the cross. Is not there to watch him give up his life. Is not there to watch Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus take his body down. He's not there when the tomb is closed. He's not there for any of it. He is in hiding. And that just, again, Simon Peter's the one to overreact. Simon Peter would have been, maybe he was even the one stirring the pot and saying, oh, guys, it's so not safe. We're in danger. Because they know us. He was the one that got confronted. He's the one that they knew was following him, and he was able to lie his way out of it, but he knew it wasn't safe.
You wonder, in a parallel universe, what happens if he says, yes, I know.
Right. Yeah.
Jesus knew that was going to happen.
Yes.
How are our lives different if he says yes? That yes, he knows Jesus.
Right.
You wonder.
Oh, yeah.
It had to happen that way.
Yes.
So, because of Peter, Christianity has grown to what it is. Would he have been here? Would he have been the one to?
Right.
I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good thought. That's a really good question that I don't think there's an easy answer to. Because maybe he's the fourth cross. Jesus is crucified alongside two other criminals. Maybe he's on the fourth cross next to him. Maybe he's still crucified upside down, which is what happened when he's actually put to death for his faith. He deems that he's not worthy to die in the same way as Jesus, so he is crucified upside down. We'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Interesting.
Yeah. But it could be that they would have put him to death because he was the one that got confronted. The rest of the disciples scatter. So within reason, they're safe for now. But Simon Peter's the one that gets confronted, and Simon Peter could have been the one that would have died alongside of Jesus. He said that he was willing to do that.
In the same night.
Yeah. So maybe there's room for that. Yeah. That's a really, really good question, Eric.
You never know. We'll never know.
Right. Yes. And thank God we'll never know. But yeah.
he ran off. He wasn't there. He cannot imagine what he's feeling through that whole process.
Yeah.
It almost feels like the prodigal son, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He feels sheepish and comes home.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it could be, we'll get to it next week, but it could be why Simon Peter is so, not even desperate, it's not the right word. He's the one that jumps off the ship. He's so, not excited, but I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? He wants to get to Jesus so bad that he's willing to throw off his friends. He's willing to throw off everything in order to get back to Jesus. It's the end of that story.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's Jesus seeing him from far off, but it's not Jesus doing the running this time. It's Simon Peter.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. He disappeared for a few days there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. This all unfolds without him, and then that's why Sunday's story is so important. The restoration. And we'll get to it, but.
So what are we covering next week in this series?
Yeah, so next week is very connected to last week. Last week was the 3 denials that Simon Peter gives to the crowds about Jesus. And then this coming week is going to be the restoration, where Simon Peter and the disciples, after the resurrection, they don't quite know what to do yet. And so they try to find something familiar, something that makes sense, to help them make sense of what's just all happened. And because so many of them have a fishing background, Simon Peter says, look, guys, let's just go fish. And they do, and it goes poorly, and we're used to seeing that because then here comes Jesus. They fish all night, they catch nothing, very similar to how all this started. And Jesus is a figure on the shore that shouts to them, try again on the other side of the boat, try on the right side. The right being not left, not incorrect. So they do, and they pull in this massive catch, and John, the beloved disciple, says it has to be Jesus. It just has to be Jesus. This is not the first resurrection appearance. This is actually the third. It just has to be Jesus. And Simon Peter doesn't wait to find out. Simon Peter jumps off the boat, and swims to shore, and lo and behold, it's Jesus. Jesus has a meal prepared for them. They break bread together. They share bread and fish on a very, on the beach. And then Simon Peter and Jesus walk away together. And Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And Simon says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Every time, 3 times Jesus asks, 3 times Simon Peter affirms his love of Jesus, and 3 times Jesus gives him a direct instruction of what to do next. And that's to feed sheep. And so it's a reignition of that process of Simon Peter becoming the rock upon whom the church is built. And then really everything just kind of goes from there. But without this moment, had Simon Peter not come back in this way, it's like we were talking about earlier. It may not have been Simon Peter that became the rock.
Mm-hmm.
Because Simon Peter was completely out of it.
Yep.
And could have just wallowed in that the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't. He comes back to Jesus, and Jesus receives him and restores him and then calls him anyway. And so often when we have these moments where we deny Jesus in these micro and macro ways, it can be so easy for us to just be too afraid to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Yet Jesus is there for us constantly and is willing to re-engage with us as we re-engage with him and still use us for his glory to do the work that he has for us to do, which has not changed. It's still for us to feed sheep.
Right.
And so it's all about how the sermon is going to be all about how Simon Peter's life is never the same because of this moment. How he is restored fully in the eyes of Jesus and in the eyes of the other disciples. And is then free to walk forward as a flawed and faithful disciple of Jesus Christ.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us in this week's Cut for Time podcast. Join us again next week in church at 10 a.m. or online or for the podcast next week.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.